Welcome to the Atheist Podcast. I'm Erin.
And I'm Kelley. Atheist is where we will explore American cultural trends through the lenses of a devout theist
and a devout atheist. We will discuss the messiness of being human,
the latest in social science, psychology, and American culture,
and what any of it has to do with Homo sapiens' longtime preoccupation with religion. Hey, Kelley.
Hey, Erin.
How's it going?
It's going good.
Yeah, man. I am super excited for this series that we're about to start.
I know. Witches.
It's going to be awesome.
It's going to be super awesome. So we are doing a series now. It's going to be like a three, maybe even plus.
Yeah.
We're considering episode series on witches, which we're kind of talking about like the history of witches.
Yeah, here's kind of where we're going. So I think the first episode we're going to talk a little about, the history of witches in America in the way that like most of us kind of think about that idea.
Like the Salem Witch Trials.
Yeah.
And like what that looks like. But then also we're going to veer into kind of like this idea that witches were typically women who were in who had gifts in some kind of healing modality and who were vilified for it and who were whose reputations were called out in order to disempower them from a power that, most likely men did not understand. Sorry, Justin. But one of the things that I'm really interested in this subject is this idea that I'm kind of a Mary Magdalene freak. I have a big, huge tattoo of her on my arm. But the idea that this kind of that there is this lineage of female sacraments that women have typically done throughout the centuries that were stopped and that have, like I said, have been kind of vilified.
Yeah.
And that Mary Magdalene was somebody who anointed the dead, anointed the sick. And there's all kinds of different things that women have done throughout history. And then, like for Mary, when Pope Gregory basically said she was a prostitute, then everybody kind of, there you go, and
that she would have been like one of the apostles, essentially. Yeah.
And now we call her the apostle to the apostles because she's the one, right? Who Jesus, the dead Jesus, who was alive, came to, right?
Yeah.
So even like mediumship. Like if you can even call that a mediumship, right?
Yeah, totally.
She was the first witness at the tomb. And so she is the one who went to the other apostles who were up hiding, right? And said, you know what? He's not dead. He's alive. And also he took the form of a gardener, which she didn't recognize quite at first. And then she did recognize him.
I forgot that part of the story.
But his wounds were all still there. So there was, so then there was doubting Thomas who was like, show me your wounds. Right. So she didn't need to be shown. She just kind of, he was there. So there's this whole thing that when Mary was kind of struck from the story in a lot of ways, we lost this whole line of practices and of female wisdom, I think, in the church that is really, really important in these ways that women serve and take care of one another and and all of us, and as sacred rites too.
Yeah.
So we're going to be talking about to a death doula.
Yeah. So cool. So interesting, which I didn't even know this was like a thing that existed until Kelley told me about it. And then I met somebody else who also knows someone who's a death doula. And I'm like, oh, wow.
Synchronicities.
Okay.
Yeah. So death doula. And that's Amy Rush. And then also And Amy is also a medium.
Mm-hmm.
And then we're talking to Katie Wedding, who is a medium and a grief counselor.
Grief educator.
Thank you. Yes, grief educator. So we have these 3 amazing episodes coming up, and I cannot wait.
Yeah, and we're going to kick the first one off right now with our first guest, who is someone I know very well.
Yes,
It's my
you do.
wife.
Yeah. Yay, Lauren.
Yeah.
Hello. Nice to be here. Thank you for having me.
Yeah.
Thanks for being here.
Of
We really
course.
appreciate. Who's watching the kids?
Ooh, shoot.
It's my parents.
Oh, okay.
Yeah.
Okay,
yeah.
good.
And actually, the boys are on their way to the city soccer game, so they just have a lane.
Nice.
Yeah.
Nice.
Should be fun. It'll be a hot day though. It's pretty warm here.
Yeah.
Yeah, hopefully they get some shade in that stadium.
Yeah. So Lauren is coming on to share with us. So she's kind of a history buff. I was joking the other day. I'm like, you basically have, a master's degree in history, everything that she reads.
Not true.
No, I mean,
Yeah.
but she's been recently doing a lot of reading and researching around the Salem Witch Trials, and then she's also been doing a lot of genealogical research, and then found out that she has an ancestor who had been accused of witchcraft.
Ooh.
Oh, yeah.
Yeah. So then that's just kind of got us thinking about, all of the psychological, group psychology, culture, social science around those periods of history and, why those things come to happen. So it's like,
Yeah.
you should come on the show and talk about all the things you've learned.
Yeah.
Okay.
That'll
be a short episode.
No. I'm sure not.
No.
So how did you pick up the book about the Salem Witch Trial after you learned about your genealogy, or did this thing happen at the
these
same
were
time?
unrelated projects and interests. So the book was Killing the Witches by Bill O'Reilly. It's a book that it's a historical nonfiction. It kind of chronicles the Salem Witch Trials, and then goes another 50 to 100 years after that, just kind of how those trials influenced colonial America and the Constitution. They had a much greater impact than just on the 20 people that were hung during that period, which was about started in, I want to say 1692 to 1693.
Wow.
Just several months, 100 of people were arrested and accused, and 20 people ended up losing their lives. But that was kind of what the book was about, obviously. And then separately, I was looking through just Ancestry.com. I did Ancestry DNA, and then was kind of building out my family tree. And I came across, one of my ancestors who had been accused of witchcraft. Now, admittedly, this is my 11th great grandmother.
Yeah.
She was born in 1630. Just to give you an idea, by the time you hit 11th great grandparent, you have 8,192 of them. So I have a lot of 11th great grandparents.
Yeah.
She is just one, and probably the most interesting of the batch. So
How did you even find that? On Ancestry?
yeah,
They'll give you all this kind of
they have unbelievable records they have access to on Ancestry.com. Not that this is a commercial for Ancestry, but they make suggestions. You can look and see if it fits with your tree, and then either accept or reject that suggestion of that ancestor. And there is a chance that some of these could be wrong, because there's a lot of people that are if your last name's Smith, it's going to be a little bit more challenging.
Yeah.
But if you have an unusual last name, then chances are that's the
Yeah.
person that you're related to.
Wow. And so tell us about your 11th great grandmother.
Yeah, so her name was Margareta Eriksdotter, and she was born in Sweden in 1630.
Woohoo, Swedes.
I know, yeah. And then she got married. Her married name was Matson, so Margareta Matson is what she was tried under. She came to the United States on a boat named Orne in 1654, so just a long time ago. They came to Pennsylvania, and after her arrival, she was accused of bewitching cows and some calves.
Bewitching cows.
Yeah, that was actually a very common thing that people would be accused of as far as witchcraft, is bewitching.
Well, how can they? What's going on with the cows that they're bewitched?
Literally nothing.
Yeah,
They're cows. None of this is based in fact.
Yeah.
Right. So what makes people think they're bewitched?
I could not tell you. So, I mean, as
That's
far as the Salem
bizarre.
Witch Trials, it was a group of 12 to 13-year-old girls that
Yeah.
started the whole thing. And they basically just accused random people of bewitching them. And what they would do as a group would act out in court or in public in front of these people as though they were being controlled or bewitched by this individual. And of course, this person had no control over what these people were doing. This was just a play they were putting on for
Yeah.
people. And one of them actually years later admitted to the whole thing out of guilt, and also one of the families kind of pressed her to do so, and she finally was like, "Yes, we did this."
Yeah, we made it all up.
Yeah,
The OG Mean Girls.
exactly. Yeah,
Ugh.
but I think that's one of the things Erin and I had been talking about. Why somebody would do this? Why somebody
Yeah.
would over and over again see people be hung in front of them because of what they're saying,
Right.
and then
Yeah.
continue to do it again. You'd think the guilt the first time would be like,
Right. Yeah.
but apparently not.
Yeah.
So, and I might be saying her name wrong, Margareta. I don't know. She was Swedish, so who knows how she
Yeah.
said it. But basically, so she was accused. She was brought to court. So if she had done trial in a puritanical kind of colony, she likely would have been hung. But luckily for her, Pennsylvania was founded by Quakers.
Yeah.
And
Good old Quakers.
I know, Quakers saved the day yet again. And so they determined that she was guilty of having she was found guilty of having the reputation of a witch, but not guilty of bewitching animals. And William Penn, you guys know anything about history, is one of the founders of Pennsylvania. And so he was the judge in her trial, and he
What?
acquitted her. And people said that they witnessed her riding broomsticks. And then his response was, "Well, I know of no law against it."
Oh, that's amazing.
Yeah.
Admittedly, there's no actual record of him saying that, but he became part of kind of the story later
lore.
on.
Yeah.
I like to think that that's true.
Yeah.
I love thinking that's true. Yeah.
Anyway, that was my last little piece.
Yeah, it's pretty cool. It's pretty interesting.
So she had she was guilty of having the reputation of a witch, but not actually.
Yeah, and in that time, just having the reputation, and any time, just having
Yeah.
a bad reputation can be.
Yeah.
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 We'll talk about that. Like, I think that's a really important piece of it. Yeah.
Agree.
Particularly for women, that reputation is more important actually in some ways than,
Yeah. Yeah. I mean, but for anyone, right? Because
Right.
it is like ultimately, we're hierarchical animals, and a big part of like where you sit in the hierarchy is due to your status, which is due to your reputation, right? And so when someone is like injurious to that, if you, it is very emotionally difficult. I mean, I think that what was I just listening to or reading? They were just talking about like that. That's one of the things that leads a lot of people to, end up committing suicide. It's like after something that's happened that's been really like injurious, or that they feel or perceive to be, damaging to their reputation. They're just like, they can't handle it.
Yeah. Well, and I do think, yes, that's true with everybody, but I think women particularly are very vulnerable to that kind of attack.
Yeah.
And Bill and I have been watching, sorry, this is a little side note,
That's
but
okay.
Bill and I have been watching this series. It's like a British series about a serial killer in the 70s in Yorkshire. And they were calling him the Ripper. And it took them they were years, this man was killing for years. And when he started, the police saw that there was he was killing women late at night. And so predominantly he was killing prostitutes. And this was also during
Is this the Jack the Ripper story?
No,
that was earlier. Yeah.
That was Victorian. But because they had made that part of his modus operandi, there were women who were not prostitutes who had been attacked by him but wouldn't come forward because they were afraid the reputation they would get from having been attacked by him would be worse than actually catching him.
Wow.
I mean, talk about Like how these like scenes where they're trying to convince women to come forward and they're like, no, you're not gonna put me in that lot. And, it's kind of devastating. So fragile. So here are these girls that are starting these rumors, but also people were pretty quick to believe them. Like adults didn't just
right. And one of the reasons that might be is the first couple people they accused were kind of lower on the social hierarchy, and it was easy for people to accept that they would be in league with the devil, basically.
Right.
Interestingly, this might be a couple different points to kind of come back together, but one of the early women who was accused was a slave. And back then, if you admitted to being a witch, if you said, yes, I am a witch, they didn't hang you. You were let free because they thought if you admitted to it, the devil would leave you because you were already found out.
Yeah, this is like the Tatuba character or
exactly,
whatever.
Yes. And so she was like, I don't have a reputation I'm trying to protect. Yes.
Yeah.
I am a witch.
I want to save my life.
She lived. They let her go. They're like, all right, there you go. Whereas the 20 other people that were hung and killed wouldn't say that.
Right.
Yeah.
Just to say, yes, I'm a witch.
Right.
Because they would rather be hung in many cases than to say that out loud.
Yeah. Yep. Yep. So again.
So kind of go like the Puritans versus the Quakers. So when you said like, if she had been, your ancestor had been in like a, in Salem, right? She would have been hung. So what?
Or Boston, or
So what were the differences? Like, what are the differences in sort of those cultures that lead to those different outcomes?
Well, I think, and I'm not a religious
scholar
by any stretch of the imagination, but from what I understood in this book is the Puritans kind of ruled with fear. As a lot of religions do, and the Quakers ruled with love more so than anything else. And that was, even until the Civil War, Quakers were known for kind of standing up for the little guy.
Yeah, and it's a peace-driven theology as opposed to
very egalitarian. They from the beginning they thought women should have the right to vote. They were adamantly against slavery, where at the time a lot of preachers were pro-slavery.
Right.
Yeah. So that reminds me of an article from The Atlantic that was published a few years ago called The New Puritans, which was written by Anne Applebaum, who's mostly famous for, at least now, for covering the war in Ukraine and politics in Russia. She grew up in that part of the world. But the piece that she wrote was sort of looking at how, the events of Salem she's like we often cast those as being like, oh, these things of the past. Right. And she's like, no, these are things that are always going to be present in American culture and are going to be repeated over time. And she opens the piece with this, sort of the story of the Scarlet Letter and how Hester Prynne is like cast out from everyone else, which actually kind of going back to what I was saying earlier is like, not only are we hierarchical animals, we're social animals, and there's nothing that is more devastating than being like made to go about by yourself, right? So there's no protection of the group. But so she's just writing about like different periods of time in history, including now in sort of modern cancel culture, where we see sort of this like mob mentality that develops. But you were talking about or thinking about how the events of Salem ultimately influenced a lot of, the colonies and the American government. Can you tell us a little bit more about that?
Yeah. So, back when all these trials were going on, people were, in one of a few categories, but most people wanted nothing to do with it. And most people didn't believe these people were witches and were horrified to see them hung, but would not speak out against it because people that did would be accused themselves and sometimes hung. So like I said, it started out with kind of people on the lower rung, but by the end they were accusing people at the highest levels of society. The governor of Massachusetts, Sir William Phipps, his own wife was accused at one point. And that's when he kind of pulled the plug on the whole thing.
Finally.
So, right. So the problem was he very much trusted Increase Mather and Cotton Mather, who were very prominent religious and political figures of their day. He trusted them to do the right thing. He trusted their opinions. And he was like, what do I know about witches? These people should be in charge of this thing. Because this was a time that people generally believed in...
that it could exist.
It could exist.
Yeah. Right.
But he was out building a fort in Maine throughout most of these months. And so he wasn't around. And when he got back and his own wife had been accused, he was like, what has happened here?
Yeah.
And then he's like, stop what you're doing.
I left for a few months to build a condo.
Right.
And look what's happened. The country's gone to shit.
Right. But yeah, I mean, one of the people who was killed, actually, it's an interesting anecdote because the bravery he exhibited. But, I say 20 people, and those numbers can, depending on how you look at it, could fluctuate a little bit. I think it was actually 19 maybe that were hung, but he was maybe potentially the 20th. He was pressed to death.
Oh, yeah.
So he was a wealthy landowner who did not believe in any of this that was going on. And the law stated that I believe it was the sheriff would get his property if he was accused. So the sheriff, in a roundabout way, got these girls to get together and accuse him.
Oh my God.
But he never entered a plea, and they couldn't steal his property unless he entered a plea. And I don't know how these laws worked. I might be kind of oversimplifying things. But so he wrote a will in prison, and then they tortured him by pressing him to death for days, trying to get him to plead guilty or not, one of the two, guilty or not guilty. But he never did, and he ended up dying. And so the sheriff never got his property, and his family inherited it.
Wow.
Well,
Yeah.
Some silver lining, I guess.
Wow.
Man.
But yeah, just basically anyone could get accused.
Yeah.
And it was,
there's a lot of different competing reasons why somebody would want to do that.
But if you were, it was the end of the road for you. So you
Yeah.
just kept your head down and did what you could to protect, like you were saying, Erin, to protect your family, to protect your kids and your spouse, and your long, generational. This was felt generationally.
Yeah.
And so more to how this influenced further on down the line, colonial America. So as I mentioned, Cotton Mather was a big player in this, and huge supporter, and helped drive a lot of the Salem Witch Trials. He made a big name for himself during this time.
Yeah.
I think he actually wrote a book on how to spot witches.
How to catch a witch.
How to catch a witch. It was the New York Times bestseller, 1692.
So most of the now there were people that were accused of things that it was just right. It was like this. It was like a trumped up charge, in order to get the sheriff, some land. But then there were also women that were accused simply because they were maybe doing things that women typically didn't do, or things that were outside of the norm, like foraging or healing.
Yeah, and any of those things. And my ancestor, I think, was a natural, a natural healer, or however you want to say it. That the skill she had learned back in Sweden. She also didn't speak English, so that was a big one of these women during the Salem Witch Trials. So they believed that a witch couldn't say the Lord's Prayer. And so they challenged her to say the Lord's Prayer, and she couldn't, so they hung her. She didn't speak English. She didn't even know what they were trying to ask her to do.
Yeah. Yeah.
So
outsiders are easy targets, at least in the beginning. And then it's also so what is the psychology too of the of these the 12, 13-year-old girls who are like, all right, we're gonna get together and we're gonna do this. What's the motivation there?
I think some of the first people accused were within their households, because this is a time when families and their servants would be living very close together, and I can't remember the exact details, but I think if one of the first woman was maybe one of their servants.
Okay.
And Tituba had helped raise one of the girls. Was like
I remember that.
Second mother to her, and yet they accused her. So what drives somebody to do that? I can't say. I don't understand that, but they got a lot of attention for it,
Yeah.
and it became a positive feedback cycle. They kept getting reinforced for this behavior, and when they'd walk down the street, people were afraid of them. They had all this
They had
power.
power.
Yeah. And the 12-year-old girl in colonial or pre-colonial America had zero power.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah, and I can't imagine that was like a hugely raucous, entertaining time. I mean, that was a pretty awful place and awful time to live. Like, it was rough.
Yeah.
So, the same reason that causes, people to, troll people on the internet or do anything to bully anybody. I mean, it's kind of, I think for some people it's out of boredom and spite and a way of kind of just.
I think boredom and spite were probably two words that would easily characterize the motivations of these young girls.
Yeah.
Crazy.
So how has this affected you? Now, you are a doctor.
Mm-hmm.
Are you a witch?
Are you a witch? Are you a witch, Lauren?
I have been bewitching cows. So
well, you have a reputation.
I do have a reputation.
Sorry.
I just mean like, have you, I don't know, has this kind of given you a different view of women throughout history? Have you kind of have these kinds of stories popped up anywhere else? Because when you have, when you're kind of researching and you're looking at things, all of a sudden you start seeing things through that lens.
Yeah.
I just wonder what, how that's kind of shaped things for you.
Well, as I don't know about as throughout history, I'm sure it would if I put some time or thought into it. But I think what Erin and I have been talking about is just how it's playing out currently.
Yeah.
Like how people, if they're accused of something, it almost doesn't matter whether they did it or not. They've already lost their jobs. They've already lost their reputation. And, you hear about these lawsuits of people against their accusers. And even though they might win those lawsuits, that's not in the news.
Right.
Nobody's worried about that.
Yeah.
Not to downplay, people are victimized every day by powerful men and women, like, but.
Yeah, it reminds me too of like, and this is, I know, a very sensitive, touchy topic, but like in academic cultures where people are made to, you have to make certain statements of belief now before you can actually get a position.
Yeah, talk more about that because I've read a little bit about this, but
well, and just like the DEI statements that people are are made to say, and I've read some articles of people who have said, it's not that I disagree with that. I don't disagree with the statements, but the fact that I am being made to say anything as a litmus test for my, I'm a chemist, and it's just, it feels, and well, the person that I read, that I'd read this article
Orwellian
from,
kind of.
it's kind of Orwellian. And this person, like Applebaum, is it Applebaum? Was from Russia.
Yeah.
And so he, as a professor, was like, this feels very, very back to my Soviet roots.
I think that's a really good point. And that's really what she I think is getting at in the piece, right? Is like all these people who have lost their jobs for various reasons, but a lot of it was coming down to this like what is the role of like kind of speech codes, right? Or like, okay, there's all these things that you can or cannot say, and if you say something that is, like interpreted by different people, and someone finds it offensive, then all of a sudden now you don't have a job anymore. And it's like, okay, policing this, or now we're going to take this next step of like, we're policing it in this way, but then we're going to take this next step of before we can even hire you, now you have to like kind of put your hand on this Bible, right, so to speak, and like commit to stuff that you're like, what am I even saying that I committing to even believe this, but I can't be employed if I don't say that I pledge myself to this.
Yeah, that's it. Like it's like some kind of fealty, right?
Yes.
Like it's
Yeah, and she's just talking about all the times in human, in history, not even, in like more recent history, where that ends up with a lot of people going on along with really bad things that, and the culture kind of, or government goes in a certain direction, and you're like, I don't really have a lot of agency here to say no, because if I don't do, then I'm the guy getting pressed or whatever.
Right. Exactly. And it's why people don't.
Yeah. So you're like, I guess I'm going to sit on the sideline.
Like it's diversity, equity, inclusion right now, and then you just keep signing your contract every year, and 15 years down the road, you're like, oh wow, wait, what am I signing here?
Yeah.
What did you put in here in the last 15 years?
Right.
Exactly.
Right.
Yeah. I read an article this morning about, I don't know if you've heard about this, but in Berkeley, the law school, the dean of the Berkeley Law School, whose entire life has been dedicated to free speech, and he's Jewish, and he invites the first year law students every year to his home, for this, big thing. And I think because like the now graduating students were it was still like COVID, he didn't do it their first year, so he was inviting them. And on campus, he has been attacked, and there's been like these terrible cartoons like drawn of him and his wife, and claiming that they're Zionists and all these things. And don't go. And he said, this makes me sad. It's hurtful, but I'm not stopping it because it is, it's free speech. Yeah. But then he had these people, the students, over to his house, and then in the middle of his own private home at his, in his event, a student stands up with a microphone that she had brought and starts to just, go off on them and, insult,
And what is that student like? That's like the 12-year-old girl who's just like, what does she think she's getting out of that? Is what I want to know.
Right.
To harm somebody else in that way who's doing their best to put good into the world.
Right. And it just became messy. And so then there's a video of his wife trying to take the microphone. It's just awful.
It shouldn't have been the wife that had to do that. There were other people there that should have stepped in. And that's frustrating to me.
Right.
Yeah.
Yeah. So we are, believe me, I've wanted, for my last couple of years as a theater teacher, I wanted to do The Crucible so badly.
Yeah.
I wanted that play to be produced.
And that's that. So the point that you just made about the, and maybe this is a good answer here, right? So the point that you just made about the video. That goes on TikTok, right?
Exactly.
Because that's a big part of what's going on now and why it's going on now, right? When we go back to these ideas of
the world is your stage.
Yeah. And I want to have power and influence. And how do I get that? I create a show and I get a video of it.
You have a town square.
Yeah.
And I get likes and views.
Yeah. Even at the expense of someone who's like, I'm trying to do the right thing, or have, even stand for principles like that. We would say, this is a principled person who's like, even though I don't agree with what you're saying, I believe in your right to say it. And you're like, it's just, it's hard. It's really, it's frustrating but that's why Ann Applebaum was writing that piece too.
Yeah.
It's odd too. Like, we spend all this time trying to have diversity and inclusion, but these people are standing up literally against diversity and inclusion.
Right.
Of ideas.
Yeah.
Right.
Yeah.
Yeah. I don't know if they see it that way.
No, probably not.
They may not have put a lot of thought into it.
Oh, man.
Well,
so
are we going to get canceled after this?
Maybe.
It's okay. Find your connections.
Yeah.
But these are the kinds of, uncomfortable and challenging conversations that, I think are important to have, because the whole point in, moving forward as a culture is not in stymieing conversations.
No. Yeah. And actually, so, my favorite, Jonathan Haidt, right? The reason that he wrote that book, The Coddling of the American Mind, which came out a few years ago, was he was before he recognized like this is a mental health crisis that's driving this in part because of everybody's relationship to technology and social media. Like as a professor at NYU, he had kind of like gotten used to over his career interacting with students, and it was like, okay, this is like how students are, right? And then around, the 2014, 2015 or so school year, give or take, he started to realize like these are different kinds of students than the ones that I've taught before, where like if I say something that's imprecise, like I get complaints about the things that I'm saying in class, right? And so he has this friend who was the director of FIRE, which is like the Freedom of Information, Individual Rights in Education. And this guy, he's an attorney. His whole job was to basically, for his entire career, he would help students, defend students against censorship from administrators. And at the exact same time period that Haidt was seeing this shift in his classroom, this guy, who for decades had been an attorney helping students, saw the reverse happening, which was students saying, I need you to help me, like basically create rules so that these people can be censored. I don't want to hear these ideas that I disagree with. And he's like, what is going on? And then so it was the two of them getting together, the thing that really resonated with him was that his co-author had struggled with depression and had like successfully battled it with cognitive behavioral therapy. And what he was seeing was like the exact same mental distortions that he had sort of overcome through cognitive behavioral therapy, were the exact same distortions and like patterns of thinking that these college students were engaging in.
Yeah.
And so he's like, where did this come from? Right? Like really, really black and white thinking.
Yeah.
Well, it's also a childish way of thinking. And a lot of these people are not growing up. They've been kept children. They've not been taught nuance, and they've not been taught their own struggle. Yeah. That they have to be uncomfortable at times.
Yeah.
But and then they hit the world, and the world's bending to them.
Yeah. Positive feedback loop.
Yeah.
But I'll point out, there are no more Puritans in New England. They didn't make it.
Yeah.
Yeah.
They all changed religion.
Yeah. Yeah. It's very ironic, though, that organization's name is FIRE.
Right?
Right?
Yeah.
At the stake.
Oh, the witches.
Yeah.
Actually, they hung them.
They didn't burn them. That's like a misconception.
That's a misconception.
So in Europe, early on, they would burn them. But eventually
Joan of Arc, right?
Oh, yeah. They burned her. They burned her good.
They burned her good.
So, but no, they determined through scientific means that the witch could be just as dead if you hung them.
Oh.
So
Science.
Yeah.
Interesting. Then they brought in science.
So, ultimately, I guess kind of going back to sort of like the ideas that we, when you develop a government, right? And you're like, okay, how do we sort of try to protect ourselves from like falling into these intellectual or like cognitive traps where we're, bowing to fealty to whatever ideas. It's like, I mean, this is in theory, right? The idea, I guess, of the American government, like why they didn't want religious, as much religious influence.
Yeah. And this might be a good time to kind of tie in that part, because maybe it'll give you a little bit of hope for the future. So like I said, Cotton Mather, big inspirational figure in his time, responsible for a lot of ruined families and broken lives and hearts. But he he died in 1728. And Benjamin Franklin, who was one of the oldest, I think the oldest founding father, Benjamin Franklin was born in 1706, and he actually met Cotton Mather. There weren't that many people around at the time.
Yeah.
So
everybody was kind of friends.
All these people knew each other. And while he respected him as a learned man, he did not agree with what had happened.
Yeah.
And everyone was still very aware of the Salem Witch Trials when Benjamin Franklin was growing up. It was still talked about. It was still an embarrassment for everybody. And so that kind of contributed to he influenced greatly the other founding fathers, 50 years later, however many years. And they all recognized how dangerous religion could be because of the Salem, in part because of the Salem Witch Trials.
Yeah.
And while nowadays the new Puritans, as you mentioned, Erin, and I do think they have a lot in common. They I don't see how they're going to continue this positive feedback cycle. I think at some point people are going to recognize how dangerous this kind of intolerance is, and that it's not good for our society, and it's not good for anybody involved. It's not good for that girl to go and plan to bring a microphone to her professor's home and be cruel to him. Like, that's not good for her soul.
Right.
And so I think, years from now, we'll kind of look back on this time just as they did in colonial America, look back on the puritanical time and make different choices.
Yeah. So I've been thinking about this idea of like positive and negative feedback loops a lot. We were talking about this on the other episode.
On the last episode.
But it seems like we're stuck in this like positive feedback loop, and those like they explode, right? Like eventually they're they end, but it's usually not in
a pretty way.
Yeah. So, but I mean, the hope is that we come to some sort of like healthy balance. But I mean, I definitely think that new Puritans, right, that we're in that because of this technological social media sort of all of those themselves create positive feedback loops.
And it's a huge social change, just like the colonies were a huge social change. These people moved from Europe where they had never had any kind of freedoms to act out on these ideas, and then they get here and they're like, hey, I've got an idea.
But it's a really bad one.
So, and then wasn't the Crucible, it was written after like the McCarthy era, right?
It was written in response.
So then, I mean, he was trying to remind us, Arthur Miller. Arthur, just trying to remind us then, hey, these ideas,
they didn't work then.
And just keep recycling them.
I know.
But we do. We keep coming back to them.
But then we keep moving away from them as well.
Yeah.
And I mean, that's just maybe what humans need to do.
Yeah.
We always want to just be a little bit miserable, I think.
That's a fair point.
Yeah. I think the other thing about the new Puritans too, and I've read some things about this, is also that there is this kind of puritanical thinking on both sides.
Oh yeah,
right.
Yeah.
We're all susceptible to it.
We're all susceptible to it, and it's like that. That like 10% on either side. That is just.
Yeah. Well, I think, I mean, to that end of we're all susceptible to it. I mean, I think that the only way, because I think that it is just a bug in the human mind that can easily kind of get into group think and black and white thinking. But I think the only way to escape it is sort of like to always sort of be challenging yourself and being like, am I in it? Like,
am I doing
it?
Right.
Am I, having kind of a
could I be wrong?
Critical.
You look down in your hand and you're like, oh, there is a pitchfork there.
Yeah.
Let me put this down.
Yeah, for sure.
Yeah.
I mean, well, Lauren, thank you.
Yeah, this was fun.
Thank you for having me.
You should be an expert on something else. Go read another book and come back.
And come back. Yeah, what should we have her study?
Yeah, what are you reading right now?
Ooh, what am I reading right now? I just finished a slave narrative, Running 1,000 Miles for Freedom, which is really good. If you guys, it's a short read.
Yeah.
And then I just started. Hold on, let me look. I couldn't tell you that.
Also, I just want to say, as you're looking at that, I've now realized why. Like, well, I guess I probably did, but it's reminded me why the word pressing, right? When you press somebody for information. Right?
Oh, yeah.
It's from that literally.
I didn't realize that.
Yeah.
Oh, yikes.
Yeah.
That's a dark origin.
It's a dark origin.
That's how you order a panini. You just keep that in the back of your mind.
So I'm listening to the Grant audiobook, which is, by the way, 48 hours long.
Oh my God.
Yeah. So I'll probably never finish it. But I just started a book called Passionate Mothers, Powerful Sons, and it's about Churchill and Roosevelt's mothers, kind of their biographies.
Nice.
See, I told you she has like a master's in history.
Yeah.
If I could actually retain everything I read, it's hard. We were reading every 4 or 5 pages. I get interrupted by like a small child.
Yeah.
Or,
I hear you.
Or a dog.
Or a cute dog.
Cute dog. Well,
Or a
I see
cat.
why you guys are together because obviously you're two super smarties who get excited about big ideas.
I know we do.
We do like to think
talking,
about things and talk about stuff.
Yeah. Well, thanks for thinking and talking about things with me today.
Yeah, it's been fun.
As always, thank you for listening. Our listener base is growing every month, and that's because of all of you. Please, if you haven't done so yet, make sure you share this episode with a friend.
If you have any topic suggestions, questions, or thoughts on the show, feel free to write us at atheist@stlpodcast.com.
Atheist is produced by Justin Seiwell and Trend Media STL. Be sure to follow us on Instagram @STL Podcasts.
Thank you for listening, and keep looking for connection.